He was fired on a Friday. By Monday morning, his former employer was dead, bound at the feet, and face down in a ravine off a federal highway. 3 PIX transfers totaling roughly 15,000 reais had already cleared from the victim's own phone while he was still alive in the back of his own company van. And the man who ordered those transfers, the man who forced his fingers to the screen, had been convicted of kidnapping less than 2 years earlier. He had served time. He had been released, and Alfredo Fraga dos Santos, a 53-year-old contractor and lawyer from Balneário Camboriú, had no way of knowing any of that when he offered this man a job. My name is Harrison Cross, and this is the Blackout Tapes. On May 11, 2026, in the coastal city of Balneário Camboriú, in the state of Santa Catarina, Brazil, a respected construction businessman was abducted from the parking garage of his own company, driven across municipal lines and executed in a stretch of dense scrubland adjacent to the BR-470 federal highway in the neighboring city of Gaspar. The investigation that followed lasted less than 12 hours before both suspects were in custody. One arrested in Blumenau, one intercepted at an airport in São Paulo. Both eventually confessed. This episode is about how it happened, who allowed it to happen, and what a system's failure to contain a violent recidivist cost one man everything. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to June of 2024 in the city of Belém, in the northern state of Pará, because the man who killed Alfredo Fraga had done something nearly identical before, and the justice system knew it. Let's start with who Alfredo was, because the case only makes sense once you understand the kind of person the perpetrators chose to target, and why that choice was not an accident. Alfredo Fraga dos Santos was, by all accounts from people who knew him, someone who made a room warmer by being in it. He was 53 years old, originally from the state of Bahia in Brazil's northeast, and had at some point made the decision to migrate south toward the booming construction market of Santa Catarina's coast. He built a company in Balneário Camboriú. He also held an active registration with the Brazilian Bar Association, credentialed through the Bahia section under OAB BA 21.622. Construction entrepreneur by trade, lawyer by training. That duality says something about a man. It suggests someone who had spent years building things, both structurally and legally. Someone who understood risk and contracts and people. His social circle described him with a phrase that has stayed with me since I first read the news reports. They said he was a man small in stature, but giant in heart. That's not the kind of language people reach for when they're being polite. That's the kind of language people use when they genuinely can't think of another way to say it. He was active in a community group called Legendarios, focused on social impact work and mutual aid. Charitable giving was not incidental to his life. It was organized into it. From a purely analytical standpoint, what that profile describes is a man with a low security threshold toward people in vulnerable situations. Someone who would give people second chances. Someone who did not approach strangers with suspicion. Investigators and published reports suggest that Alfredo hired Werich Mateus Silva Trindade, a 26-year-old from the state of Pará, after he arrived in Balneário Camboriú looking for work in construction. Whether a background check was conducted, and if so, what it produced, is something I cannot confirm from available records. What I can confirm is that if a comprehensive criminal history search had been conducted through national databases, what would have come back should have disqualified that hire immediately. Before we get to the crime itself, I need to walk you through what Werich had already done. June 2024. Belém, Pará. Court records from the 9th Criminal Court of Belém describe a kidnapping operation that was not improvised. It was organized, it had a command structure, and Werich was a functioning part of that structure. The victim was Ana Leticia de Sena Passos, a physician According to case documents, Werich was operating near entertainment venues in the historic Cidade Velha neighborhood as an informal car attendant, a flanelinha in Brazilian street vernacular. He identified the doctor as a vulnerable target. She had been involved in an argument with her partner, and witnesses and police reports described her as visibly intoxicated when she left a bar that night. Werich approached her, according to testimony and case records, and persuaded her that she was not in condition to drive. He offered to take her home. That is a significant detail. It tells you something about how this man operates. He did not come at her violently in the street. He earned her trust first. He made himself useful. He lowered her guard. I think about that in the context of Balneário Camboriú. The same mechanism, applied to a different setting. The trusted employee. The familiar face in the garage. Once in the vehicle, a co-conspirator who had been waiting intercepted them. Court records describe the co-conspirator applying a chokehold to the doctor until she lost consciousness. When she regained awareness, she was bound and blindfolded inside a clandestine holding location in the neighboring municipality of Ananindeua. Werich was not peripheral to what followed. According to judicial documents, he drove the stolen vehicle to the hideout, participated in guard rotations, and operated the communication devices used to send photographs and video of the restrained doctor to her family. Material designed to produce terror and accelerate payment. The ransom demand was 500,000 reais. After negotiations, the family began making partial PIX transfers at the criminal's direction. The operation was ultimately broken when one of the associates was intercepted by police while carrying the victim's personal cell phone. Geolocation data from that device led investigators to the hideout. Ana Leticia was rescued alive. One kidnapper was killed in the confrontation. Werich was arrested. His fingerprints were collected from inside the victim's vehicle. The evidence was unambiguous. He was convicted by the 9th Criminal Court of Belém of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to 8 years of imprisonment. 8 years, and then progression de régime, gradual regime reduction, and eventually, at some point before May of 2026, a full release with no monitoring device, no ankle bracelet, no electronic supervision of any kind. He was free to travel anywhere in the country. He went to Balneário Camboriú. He got a job with a man who didn't know his history. I want to be careful here because I can't see the full judicial file. What I'm describing reflects reporting from multiple Brazilian outlets and is consistent with court documents summarized in the intelligence report I reviewed. But I think anyone looking at this sequence has to ask the same question I keep asking. What was the justification for releasing a man convicted of a factions-linked kidnapping with no electronic supervision under 24 months after that conviction? I don't have a documented answer. I don't think a satisfying one exists. Now back to Balneário Camboriú and to the timeline. According to multiple news sources and police records from the investigation, Werich was employed by Alfredo Fraga's construction company until Friday, May 8, 2026. His contract was terminated that day. The dismissal was characterized in investigative reports as a standard administrative decision. Werich did not see it that way. According to early-stage investigative documents and witness accounts collected by police, he was described as reacting with extremes and disproportionate anger. He reportedly interpreted the firing not as a routine employment matter, but as a personal offense that required retaliation. 72 hours later, across a weekend, he had recruited a 20-year-old compatriot from Pará named Werich Venancio de Sousa, developed a plan, identified the target's morning routine, and executed an ambush. The 72-hour timeline is the part that I find most disturbing because it suggests that the rage was not what caused the planning. The planning was either pre-existing or it crystallized with a speed that indicates a genuine predisposition toward this kind of violence. A man who goes from losing a job to committing murder in 3 days is not someone who crossed a line. He stepped across it without breaking stride. Monday, May 11th, 2026. The surveillance footage from the company's location at the Pará neighborhood in Balneário Camboriú is one of the most documented pieces of evidence in this case. Security cameras installed on the perimeter of the property recorded movement beginning at approximately 6:30 in the morning. Some cross-referenced intelligence sources suggest the suspects may have been positioned in the vicinity as early as 5:45, under cover of pre-dawn darkness. The footage captures the moment Alfredo drove his vehicle toward the exit and encountered what appeared to be a mechanical failure with the gate. Investigators have not treated this as coincidence. The working theory, consistent with the tactics documented in the Pará case, is that the gate mechanism was deliberately disabled or obstructed, a choke point designed to force the target out of his vehicle. Once you're out of the car, you've lost the structural protection it provides. Once you're on foot, examining the problem, you're exactly where someone lying in wait needs you to be. The attack was described in police reports as fast and decisive. A blade was used for initial control. A knife, not a gun. That choice also reads as tactical to me. A gunshot at that hour, in a commercial and residential district, would have attracted immediate attention. A knife keeps the confrontation quiet. It keeps you moving. Werich and Werich forced Alfredo into an adjacent warehouse. Internal cameras captured the restraint. He was then placed inside a Volkswagen Savero utility vehicle. Shortly after, he was transferred to a Chevrolet Spin minivan, a vehicle belonging to his own company's fleet. The vehicle transfer is a standard counter-surveillance technique. If a witness saw the Savero at the moment of the abduction and called police with a description, the evidence trail on that vehicle ends there. You buy yourself distance. What happened during the transit is documented through financial records, and the financial records are, in their own way, one of the most disturbing parts of this case. According to investigative records and reporting from outlets including ND Mais and Jornal Imagem, Werich and Werich coerced Alfredo into using his own phone to make 3 separate PIX transfers during the drive. The total amount was approximately 15,000 reais. The recipient was a bank account registered to one of the suspect's own CPF, Brazil's individual tax identification number. I want to be blunt about the tactical stupidity of that decision because it matters. PIX transfers are not anonymous. They are instantaneous. They require identity verification on both ends. They are logged in real time by the Banco Central do Brasil, and they leave a time-stamped digital record that is essentially irrefutable as evidence. The moment those transfers cleared, investigators had the receiving account, the CPF, the timestamp, and a direct chain from the victim's phone to the perpetrator's bank. Within hours of the body being found, police were already working with the financial data. The choice to use PIX rather than demand cash or use intermediary accounts tells me something about the criminal calculus at play here. In the first kidnapping, the ransom was 500,000 reais. In this one, 15,000. The target had changed. The scale had changed. The sophistication had not improved. This was not a well-planned criminal enterprise. This was a man in the grip of rage, using the first available tool to extract money as quickly as possible from someone he had decided to destroy. The PIX transfers were not a strategy. They were impatience with a digital receipt. At some point along the route, the journey covered roughly 20 kilometers from the Balneário Camboriú coast toward the interior. Alfredo's utility as a financial source was exhausted. Either the transfers hit daily limits or the accounts were already being flagged. He was no longer a resource. He was a witness. The vehicle reached an isolated area near the BR-470 Federal Highway in the rural Arraial do Ouro district of Gaspar, Santa Catarina. Forensic reports and autopsy documentation describe what happened next in terms that I find it difficult to read even in clinical language. Alfredo was removed from the vehicle. His feet were bound. a detail that appears in multiple source accounts and was visible when the body was discovered. He was struck with rocks. He was then shot in the head at close range. The forensic literature calls this pattern overkill, violence that exceeds what is necessary to cause death. Criminologists who study this pattern associate it with intense personal hostility directed at the victim specifically, not just at the act of killing. Werich had worked for this man. He had presumably spoken to him, taken direction from him, received a paycheck from him, and then he fired Alfredo the way a person erases something. The binding of the feet, the rocks, the gunshot. That sequence is not efficient execution. That is something else. The body was found by a passing motorist who noticed the shape in the ravine. Reports document the discovery at approximately 11:40 in the morning on the same day as the abduction. Emergency services and police units were alerted immediately. The Chevrolet Spin was found abandoned on a public street in Blumenau, the city where the two suspects had separated. The investigative response in the hours that followed is, in all honesty, something that deserves attention as a counterpoint to the systemic failure that preceded it. The Divisão de Investigação Criminal in Balneário Camboriú, led in this case by Delegada Luana Bax, moved on 3 simultaneous tracks. First, surveillance footage. The cameras at the company property had captured clear images of both suspects. Facial recognition and manual identification connected the footage to Werich Mateus within hours. Second, financial intelligence. With legal authorizations processed under urgency protocols, investigators traced the PIC's transfers to the recipient's CPF and confirmed authorship. Third, interagency coordination. Arrest alerts were entered into national databases immediately. Eric Kaliel was arrested in Blumenau that same afternoon. Police records indicate he was still wearing the same clothing visible in the security footage from the morning. The firearm recovered during his arrest was subsequently linked by ballistics analysis to the fatal shot. Werich's capture required a more complex operation. According to reporting from Gaúcha ZH, ND Mais, and other outlets, he had taken private or app-based transportation to the Navegantes International Airport, conveniently located just a few kilometers from Balneário Camboriú, and boarded a commercial flight headed toward São Paulo with the apparent intention of connecting north toward Pará. The Polícia Federal was activated. His name appeared on the passenger manifest. The flight was tracked. When the aircraft landed at Viracopos International Airport in Campinas, agents from the São Paulo Military Police and the Federal Police were already positioned at the gate. Werich was identified and arrested as he stepped off the plane. The Campinas Civil Police Authority received the evidence package from Delegada Bax electronically. The video records, the financial data, the investigative documentation, and ratified the arrest. He was booked on charges of aggravated extortion resulting in death. Latrocínio, in Brazilian law, robbery with homicide, qualified by the loss of the victim's life. Less than 12 hours had elapsed from the abduction to the arrest of the second suspect. My theory on what this case actually represents is not complicated, and I don't think it requires speculation beyond what the documents establish. Werich Mateus Silva Trindade was a man who had already been convicted of kidnapping. The Brazilian justice system, through the progressive regime provisions of the penal execution law, released him without monitoring and without any mechanism that would alert a future employer or the public to his history. He moved from Pará to Santa Catarina. He secured employment with a man whose openness and generosity were qualities that, in this context, became vulnerabilities. He was fired, and he resolved that grievance with the same methodology he had already been convicted of using, except this time, he did not need a faction command structure directing him from inside a Rio de Janeiro prison. He acted on his own. And because he was acting on his own, there was no faction logic to keep the victim alive as a negotiating asset. That difference The presence or absence of organizational discipline over the violence is what I think separates the two crimes. In Pará, Ana Leticia survived because the kidnapping was part of a financial operation run by a hierarchy that valued her alive. In Santa Catarina, Alfredo had no protection from the rage of one man who had decided within 72 hours of losing a job that someone had to die for it. Both men confessed. Court proceedings are ongoing. The evidence is, by any legal standard, overwhelming. What stays with me when I look at this case is not the speed of the investigation or the forensic elegance of the financial evidence. Those things are notable. What stays with me is the Saturday and Sunday before the crime. May 9th and 10th. Alfredo probably spent that weekend the way he spent most weekends. With his community, maybe working, maybe at a gathering of the legendarios, doing the kind of thing the people who knew him said he always did, looking for ways to be useful to others. He had no reason to suspect anything. He had fired an employee. That's a normal part of running a business. He didn't know this employee had served time for kidnapping. He didn't know this employee had operated as part of a factions-linked criminal cell. He didn't know that his generosity, the same generosity that defined how everyone described him, had placed him inside the operational reach of someone who already knew exactly when he left the building in the morning, which gate he used, and where the vehicles were parked. The system that should have made that information available, through background checks, through monitoring of released violent offenders, through some mechanism that flags a convicted kidnapper crossing state lines, did not exist in a form that could help him. A man who was, by all accounts, small in stature and giant in heart, did not live to see May 12th. The Blackout Tapes will continue to follow the criminal proceedings in this case. As court documents become public record, we will return to the questions that this investigation raises about penal progressivity, the absence of offender monitoring in Brazil's system, and the specific vulnerability of employers in high-growth economic zones who have no access to centralized criminal history data. For Alfredo, and for the family he left behind,